What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Alright, so getting into Hal Jordan Wanted, this is one of those Green Lantern stories that's really important. And in fact, there's actually a couple of those in Geoff Johns' run where they're just really important Green Lantern stories. And that's why you'll find different reading orders for Green Lantern in terms of like essential reading, stuff that you can skip over, stuff that you have to read, different things like that. But this story, Hal Jordan Wanted, will be required. And the reason why is because what this does is it sets the stage for the introduction of the Sinestro Corps as well as the Star Sapphires. So again, this is pretty important here. It's a pretty big deal. Now, initially what this does is it actually gives us a little bit of a prequel in the sense that this is kind of a little bit of what happened before this comic picked up. So it's really kind of between the last Green Lantern story arc and this current, Green Lantern story arc. This all just really kind of took place off panel. But essentially what had happened is Hal Jordan alongside Jillian Perlman, going by the name Cowgirl, so we'll just go ahead and call her Cowgirl, and Shane Sellers, who goes by the name Rocket Man, had basically been taken prisoner while they were on a mission for the Air Force. Now, the reason why this happened is because Hal Jordan himself really prides on the idea of never taking his Green Lantern ring with him whenever he's flying. Now, the reason why this is the case is because one, it gives him a sense of urgency and it allows him to kind of see the danger of the situation. The reason being because of the fact that in the instance, whenever he's flying a jet, the Green Lantern ring is a crutch more so than anything else. But it's also Geoff Johns giving to us the reckless nature of Hal Jordan. And that's really why those two things kind of go hand in hand. With regards to the idea of the lantern being a crutch, it's really one of those things where if Hal Jordan has his lantern ring with him, then he knows that no matter what would happen while he's flying that jet, if it malfunctions and explodes, if he flies into enemy territory and gets shot down, whatever the case may be, it would ultimately lead to the idea that he will always be okay because the ring will automatically do what it needs to do to preserve his life, assuming that he loses consciousness. If he is conscious, all he has to do is just fire up the ring and then he's all set, and he can rescue whoever it is that's with him, assuming that they're falling to their deaths or something along those lines. I mean, if they pop parachutes and they're in friendly territory, they'll be fine, but if they're in enemy territory, he can use his ring, rescue them, fly them back to the United States, and the day is saved. If he doesn't have his ring, then it means that he has to be on his guard all the time. Now, in terms of the reckless nature, that's the other half of this equation. Despite the fact that he knows that it's necessary for him to keep his eye out on everything that's going on, to make sure that he's always paying attention, listening to the people around him, what it also does is it allows him to basically put his life on the line every single time he flies. And again, that's just the reckless nature of Hal Jordan. But what Geoff Johns' run is designed to do is to provide so much character development for Hal. And that's why how we see him with regards to the later stories, especially in like Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps Rebirth, seems so different from how we see him here and how we saw him in Secret Origin, because he basically grew up. He basically moved away from being just so wildly reckless. He was still a little bit reckless, but it wasn't like, I don't care if I live or die. It wasn't one of those philosophies. It was, hey, look, I can be reckless, but I also have to recognize other people's lives are on the line here. And so again, kind of walking that fine line is one of the things that made his character so intriguing for a lot of different people. But the reason why this is important is because of the fact that in his mind, had he been wearing his Green Lantern ring, neither Hal nor Cowgirl or Rocket Man would have been captured. As soon as their jets were shot down, he would have donned his Green Lantern uniform, he would have saved them, he would have whisked off, and then he probably would have gone back and, fought against whoever it was that shot them down in the first place. The fact that he wasn't able to makes him feel like a failure. Now, the other half of this is that in this moment right now, in this particular instance, Cowgirl was sent on yet another mission, she was shot down, and she was taken prisoner by terrorists. And so because of this, Hal Jordan's more or less on a mission to find and save her, and it's kind of him basically in this position where he's trying to fix his past mistakes. Now, another aspect of this is that Cowgirl and Hal Jordan do share somewhat of a romance. The difference here is that the romance they share is nothing like what he had with Carol Ferris. With Carol Ferris, it was a lot more intimate, it was a lot more personal. It was really the possibility that they could have shared a life together. Now, that's the old school, back in the day, Carol Ferris and Hal Jordan. Really one of the things that Geoff Johns kind of worked on with the idea of the characters was to essentially create this romantic tension. Will they, won't they? That kind of thing. Now, of course, it really was a scenario where Carol Ferris essentially said, look, I run a business, you work for me, that's where the relationship stops. But the question was always asked by fans, are they going to get together? Is Carol Ferris going to be the Lois Lane of Hal Jordan's life? Is she going to be the damsel in distress, the one he always saves, the ones he would go to the ends of the earth to make sure that she stayed protected. And so that seems to be the implication here to Hal and Carol, that maybe they'll go along that direction. Now, of course, we know there's some struggle and strife in between, but the fact remains here that with regards to Hal Jordan trying to track down these terrorists, ultimately he's met with the Global Guardians. Now, keep in mind, this is all post-Infinite Crisis. And the reason why this matters is because of the fact that DC used Infinite Crisis as a way to reinvigorate and relaunch different characters and teams. It was much like when Marvel had their Avengers disassembled, then they launched House of M, then they gave us new Avengers. All right, with regards to DC's Infinite Crisis, we had the Global Guardians, then we had Infinite Crisis, and then we had the Global Guardians relaunched and revamped as an entirely new team designed for the purpose of giving us a new roster, new individuals, so on and so forth. Now, under normal circumstances, the Global Guardians are superheroes, but the way they're conducting themselves here are as villains. And they were really kind of like a background theme with regards to Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern. We didn't really, we didn't really do a whole lot of discussion with them just because, you'd have like a single panel or a single page, and it would have taken away from the overall flow of the discussion that we were having at the time. But effectively, every single time they made an appearance in Geoff Johns' Green Lantern so far, the Hal Jordan stories, ultimately it seemed like they were reporting to somebody else or working for somebody else, and they were looking to track down Hal Jordan and to basically take him prisoner. And so what seems to be taking place here is that someone somewhere has put a bounty on the head of Hal Jordan. And what we end up finding out is that the person that's done this is a guy by the name of Amon Sur, the son of Abin Sur. Now, the reason why this is important is because of the fact that this is Geoff Johns harkening all the way back to the secret origin of Hal Jordan when he first gained his lantern ring. And the idea was that when that happened, Abin Sur had basically crash landed on Earth, and he had told his ring, go find somebody worthy of becoming a Green Lantern. Now, this is where Geoff Johns kind of plays it fast and loose in terms of how the Green Lantern rings function, which is kind of ironic because he's pretty tedious in terms of the nature of the lantern rings, who can wield what rings, what determines their worthiness or their ability to wield it, and that kind of thing. But on the whole, the idea seems to be that whenever a Green Lantern dies, the ring will basically say, Green Lantern of sector whatever deceased, seeking out a new Green Lantern, seeking out a new host. It seems as though the rings will basically seek out the most worthy person in the immediate vicinity and then just race them back to Oa, just because it makes the most sense, right? I mean, if a Green Lantern dies, the immediate job is to keep that number going. One Green Lantern dies, one takes their place. The integrity of the Green Lantern Corps in number is maintained. So there'll always be 5,200 or 5,400. I can't remember how many there are right now, but the fact remains that that number will always be maintained. The issue here is that Amon Sur basically takes the stance that as the son of Abin Sur, he should have been the one to receive his father's ring. But the indication here is that it doesn't work that way. The lantern rings don't automatically pass down based on genealogy. The son is not guaranteed to get his father's ring. There's times where that happens, that's true, but for whatever reason, the ring immediately sought out Hal Jordan instead of Amon Sur. And this really seemed to make the sense because of the fact that Amon Sur was on the other side of the universe. And so it was just kind of a circumstance. It sort of worked itself out that way. Now, the reason why I say this story is so important is because what we do is we transition to a place called Salisbury, England. And there is basically some girl that's getting macked on by some guy. And this guy's, trying to make some moves when she comes across a glowing purple pink gem. Now, of course, this gem communicates directly with her and says, here's the real motivations of this guy. This guy doesn't really care about you. This guy is not really interested in you. This guy is only after one thing. Now, of course, when the girl picks up this gem, it bonds with her and she becomes a Star Sapphire. Now, of course, again, this is really kind of a cool scenario because all of this is leading up to the formation of the Star Sapphires, to their evolution as a team. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring that up. And so what we end up doing is we actually end up jumping back to Hal Jordan again. And so ultimately we end up finding out that there are a group of individuals, I believe they're called the Faceless Hunters, but they were basically telepathically controlling the Global Guardians. And that's the reason why the Global Guardians were working directly against their normal role as superheroes and trying to track down Hal Jordan. Because of the fact that Amon Sur had put this bounty out on Hal Jordan's head, really these Faceless guys were one of the many people who responded and were using the Global Guardians as a way to track down Hal. Now, this made sense if you were Amon, just because of the fact that it's really just a way to keep yourself away from being, intervened scene or being mixed into the whole fray. You know, it's one of those things where if you're going to issue a bounty, you don't do it yourself. You issue a bounty, like you send out a bounty, you hire a guy who hires a guy who hires a guy that initiates the bounty. That way there's so many lines of buffering, there's so much confusion and conflicts in there, no one can ever feasibly trace it back to you. Not only that, in the midst of all this conflict and in the midst of all this chaos and so on, we actually end up joining up with Alan Scott and as well as the rest of the Justice League when they arrive on the scene. Now, Alan Scott presents kind of a funny scenario. And the reason why is because of the fact that he's a Green Lantern, but not a Green Lantern at the same time. And this is actually very important when it comes to the character of Kyle Rayner. And we'll have that discussion once we get to, like, you know, Ion and the Torchbearer and that kind of thing. But the fact remains that Alan Scott is basically empowered by mystical energies from another universe, from Earth 2. Again, it gets kind of crazy. And so I think that's a discussion that's best isolated to context, because really it's kind of the power of Alan Scott that was sort of pushed into Kyle Rayner that makes him so unique. He has the power of the Green Lanterns and the power of the Starheart. But again, that's really more of kind of like a Kyle Rayner thing. But, you know, Alan Scott, again, I think people kind of find him confusing because one of the big questions they have is we've got the traditional Green Lanterns of John Stewart and, you know, Kyle Rayner and Hal Jordan and Kilowog and all that kind of stuff. And then we have Alan Scott just kind of out there in left field. How does he reside? What's the basis behind his power? So we might do like an origin video or something along those lines where it kind of explains the basis behind his powers and what he's capable of, if for no other reason than to kind of, you know, shine a little light on the whole concept of his character. But the fact remains here that with Hal Jordan more or less making his escape, you know, kind of tracking down who it was that initiated all the, you know, all these bounties and the Justice League essentially dealing with the fallout, we end up joining him once he's captured by Amon Sur. And what we end up finding out is that, again, Amon Sur really did all of this just for the purpose of getting a hold of what he believed to be his father's ring, of stepping into the rightful heir of the next Green Lantern following the death of his father, essentially taking Hal Jordan's place. But in the middle of all this, we actually kind of jump back to the Justice League for a second, and we actually end up joining with Batman in Gotham City, fighting against, you know, some of his own foes. And then out of the middle of nowhere, suddenly it's Bruce Wayne of the planet Earth. You have the ability to instill great fear. Welcome to the Sinestro Corps. There was a moment where Batman was part of the Sinestro Corps. And it's so cool because they basically say you've been chosen to represent Space Sector 2814. The issue with this is that Batman's willpower is so extreme that he actually overrides the Yellow Lantern ring. He overrides his ability to take possession of him. And so because of that, the Yellow Lantern ring basically says, look, you've got too much willpower. You're better suited as a Green Lantern than a Yellow Lantern. And essentially just kind of bails out and goes and searches for a more suitable host. Now the ring kind of says that it rejects him. In truth, it's really more like Batman rejecting the ring. But this is one of the cool things. You know, now the reason why this also happened is, remember, we had covered this in one of our previous videos. Batman used the Green Lantern ring by Hal Jordan. It was only for a moment. Hal Jordan gave it to Batman so Batman could make constructs of his parents and help to kind of move past all his regret and all his remorse over his parents' deaths. But the fact that he was able to use a Green Lantern ring means he's best suited for a Green Lantern ring as opposed to a Sinestro Corps ring. So the Sinestro Corps ring really kind of looks at him as tainted, really kind of looks at him as, hey, look, you've got Green Lantern energy on you, and then of course goes and searches off a new host. But the funny thing about this is that when it happens, Batman's response was like, what the hell was that? It was really kind of funny. It's just like this quick thing because it happens so fast. I mean, honestly, it probably takes place over the span of like 5 seconds, right? Like the ring pops up, Bruce Wayne, you have the power to instill great fear. Welcome to the Sinestro Corps. You'll be subjected to training. He's like, what the hell? And then it's like, get off of me. And then like the ring's like, up, air, and then it takes off. And it happens so fast. He's just like, what in the hell? It's just really funny to see that happen. But in the midst of this whole attempt by Amon Sur to basically, you know, kill Hal Jordan, to essentially, you know, take over the role of his father, ultimately the ring that rejected Batman binds itself to Amon Sur and simply says, you've been inducted into the Sinestro Corps, you have the power to instill great fear, that kind of thing. Now again, this is Geoff Johns bringing in the idea of the Sinestro Corps, and that's how it works. That's how Geoff Johns does this, and that's why it's so cool. Initially, it starts out as a trickle. A character somewhere on another planet is suddenly inducted into the Sinestro Corps, and that's it. That's the only thing you get. You just get like one panel where it's like, you have the ability to instill great fear, welcome to the Sinestro Corps. And you're just like, what? And then you don't hear hide nor hair of the Sinestro Corps for 3 or 4 volumes of books, for like 7 story arcs. You don't hear anything. And then suddenly Amon Sur shows up on Earth, tries to kill Hal Jordan, and he's brought into the Sinestro Corps. That's why Geoff Johns' writing works so well, because we get this great, big, huge, grandiose Sinestro Corps War storyline where the Green Lantern, or I guess the Guardians of the Universe, have to totally restructure how the Green Lantern rings work. Why? Because over the course of these little tidbits here and there, this story here, that story there, that story over there, the Sinestro Corps was slowly introduced. But the longer the stories go on, the more people get brought in, the bigger the whole revelation of the Sinestro Corps becomes. So instead of just one person gets inducted in the Sinestro Corps in a single comic, suddenly it's 3 people are brought into the Sinestro Corps, and then 7 people are brought into the Sinestro Corps, and the numbers just keep getting bigger and bigger. And so it's literally an in-comic book build-up to this insanely good story, because I don't know how many of you guys read Sinestro Corps War. It is amazing. It is such a good story. Man, I absolutely love it. Let me tell you something. If God was writing Green Lantern, that's exactly what it would look like, Sinestro Corps War. It is an amazing story. So what we end up doing here is we pick up with the tail end of this conversation, or I guess the tail end of this video. And of course, where Hal Jordan kind of goes to pay his respects to Abin Sur, realizing that Abin hadn't had a son, because again, this is the first time that he knew that Abin Sur had a son. Of course, he really kind of modifies his gravestone to say, you know, he was also a father, you know, paying respects to the family, to the legacy that Abin Sur had created and that sort of thing. But we also pick up in Northern California, just outside Ferris Air. And what we end up having is this woman, the first Star Sapphire that we saw here, crash lands. And the idea is that the Star Sapphire is jumping from host to host, finding a way to reconnect itself with Hal Jordan once again. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. We have an oath now. We have a ring now. We have rules and limitations on stuff that our ring can and can't do. Make sure you guys check out my Twitter. I am going to pin that to the front. So as soon as you go to my Twitter at Comics Explained, you'll immediately see that stuff there. You'll see what we can do, what we can't do, what our rings are about, all that kind of good stuff, what our rings look like, because they look really, really cool. And yeah, so I will catch you guys later. Peace.